This episode of Musket Matters is brought to you by the Vortex Ball Roller, the fastest way to prepare your round ball ammunition. Find out more at www.fourth-armory.com. Howdy folks, welcome to another edition of Musket Matters. Today we're going to talk about how to do some load workups with this Pedersoli Sharps Carbine. Now the last couple videos we've covered how to determine the size of your cartridge and the chamber depth in your Sharps, and we've covered how I make combustible cartridges for the Sharps for n-ssa competition. So now that we've covered those, we've got some cartridges completely made up, and I'm getting ready to go to the range and do some load workups. So what's a load workup? Well, it turns out that for any given bullet that you might want to use in any kind of firearm, whether it's a modern firearm or a black powder firearm, the amount of powder that you put behind it will drastically affect accuracy. So you might have a factory load, say with a modern handgun or a modern cartridge firearm, and that factory load works most of the time. But it may not give you the ultimate accuracy that your firearm is capable of. And the only way to find that out is to do a load workup. So with a load workup, what you do is you take your bullet and you make sure that you have good consistent bullets. Sometimes people weigh them and discard ones that fall outside, say 0.5% of the average weight. And then you come up with a series of groups in different charge weights behind it. So for example, I've made up a tray of cartridges here for the Sharps, and this is with black powder, and in my tray, I've got them labeled here from 30, 35, 40, 45, 50, 55, 60, 65, and 70 grains of powder. Now, for any given firearm, there's a sweet spot, and people will be able to tell you that. They'll say, oh, it's going to be about, 40 grains. And in my experience, for most percussion Civil War era firearms that are 54 caliber to 58 caliber, you're going to be somewhere in the range of 40 to 50 grains of 3F powder. 2F, you usually need a little bit more. That's one of the reasons why I shoot 3F, is because typically 3F and 2F cost the same, but you can get away with about 10% less 3F powder because it's a finer granulation. So it burns more vigorously than the 2F does. And so since the cost is the same and you can use less of it, might as well use 3F if you can get away with it. Now, some people find that 2F performs better in their muskets than 3F, and in that case you should do what the gun tells you to do. If 2F is what it suggests that it needs, then by all means use 2F. But anyway, so I've got cartridges made up here, and 5 shots is kind of a minimum of what you're going to need to prove out a load. And once you think you've found the sweet spot, then of course you're going to follow that up with a lot more in that charge weight to make sure that it wasn't a fluke. But that's all there is to it, really. You make up a series of these, and you want to weigh out your charges very carefully. So you can see here, this is the 30 grain cartridge, and you can see that the cartridge, the powder only goes up to this far in the tube. And as we discussed in the last video, I've got a cardboard wad glued down in there to keep all the powder at the back end of the cartridge, because that's where the flame from the percussion cap is going to be trying to burn through, and so you want that powder kept consistently at the back of the cartridge. So these have also been lubricated. So this is the Eras Gone Richmond Reproduction Sharps bullet, and I dip lubricate these after the cartridge is already made up. I've made a special little tool here. I just took a piece of brass tubing, copper tubing rather, and made it so that the bullet, when you set it in there, it seats just ahead of where it's going to engage in the chamber. And then when you dip this into the molten lube, you only end up lubricating the driving surface of the bullet. It's not necessary. Some people just dip the entire nose of the bullet. This just saves a little bit more lube, and you're not lubricating parts of the bullet that have no need for lubrication. So that's the way I lubricate these, and they're all done that way. But this is the 30 grain load, and then we'll go all the way to the 70 grain, and the 70 grain basically is filled all the way to the base of the bullet. So I might be able to get a little bit more powder in there. I think when I tested one out when I was starting, I found 78 grains you could possibly get in there, but I didn't want to have a problem stuffing the bullet in, and I still have a cardboard wad underneath that bullet. So this is 70 grains. That's what I worked up to. So 30 to 70 grains, 5 grain increments. You know, typically, you know, you'll be amazed, and we'll see that our targets when we get back from the range. You'll be amazed the spread. It'll start out on the low end. Generally, it starts out with a big spread, and then as you find that sweet spot, it'll really tighten up, and then it'll start expanding out again. The group size will grow. And you may find that you actually have more than one sweet spot. I've had guns before, in fact, this is one of them, where it looked like 40 grains really did well, and then it opened up, and 50 grains really did well also. So you just kind of have to work at it. Sometimes it takes multiple trips to the range to find out whether you've got, you know, a really good working combination. If 5 grain increments is too, you know, is ambiguous, you know, then you may discover that, well, somewhere around 45 grains is the sweet spot. Then you may want to go back to the range again and go in 2 grain increments, okay? And then until you find the ideal competition load. And again, this is all for competition type of work, okay? Military style cartridges for these things, as I said in the previous video, you know, they filled these things to their maximum capacity, because the idea was, you know, maximum knockdown power, maximum range, maximum impact at range. These guys were not trying to, you know, get cloverleaf groups at 100 yards or 50 yards like we're doing in an n-ssa competition. They were trying to hit a man, you know, at 500 yards with a group of people shooting at them. So different set of criteria for period military use versus what we're doing. Again, we'll touch here a word on how you go about measuring your powder. It doesn't matter how you measure your powder. What matters is that you get the same amount every time. Okay, if you don't have a way to consistently measure your powder, so you don't end up with the same amount of powder in every cartridge, your accuracy is going to suffer. You know, if you depending on how bad your spread is, your group is going to be terrible. So you know, grains is a measure of weight. You know, there's always this huge debate. Oh, do I measure black powder by volume or by weight? Grains is a measure of weight. 1 pound contains 7,000 grains of powder, black powder. So 1/7,000th of a pound is a grain of powder. So this is a unit of weight, unquestionably. Now, you can approximate your weight by volume. Okay, so if you want to use a volumetric measure, whether it's a dropper or whether it's a scoop, as long as you do it the same way every time, then you can get very close, within 1/10 to 2/10 of a grain of weight. But weight is the gold standard. And so if you have a precision scale, you know, I would recommend for load workups to use a precision scale to make sure for your load workup cartridges that you've got exactly the same amount of powder in each cartridge. Otherwise, you're chasing your tail. Now, once you've figured out that, hey, it takes 46 grains of powder to make these things work, great. You know, use a volumetric measure. You know, for competition use, 2/10 of a grain isn't going to make any difference. So, you know, do what you need to do. You know, you can sit there and, you know, pick the grains out with a pair of tweezers if that's the way you want to do it. The trick is to be consistent every time. So however you want to measure your powder, you know, you can sprinkle them out of Tinkerberry's and Tinkerbell's butt, however you want to do it. But doesn't matter. As long as you're consistent, you're good to go. So that's it. So we've got our cartridges made up here. We're going to head to the range and we're going to see how they do. We're basically going to put one blank cartridge or one blank target up for every group size of cartridge, and we will record our groups. We'll put them into some on-target software and it'll compute our average group size, and based on that information we'll figure out what's the most accurate load of powder for this new Eras Gone Richmond Sharps bullet. And when we get back from the range, we'll show you the targets and see how it worked. Okay, before we get started looking at the results here, I'm going to talk a little bit about the bullet that this load workup was done for. This is the new Richmond Sharps bullet that's being produced by Eras Gone bullet molds. Now, a little bit of full disclosure here, I do the mechanical design work for Eras Gone, and I get compensated for that. So just want to be, full disclosure here up front before we get talking about this bullet, because I'm going to talk it up a little bit because I'm impressed with it. I shoot competition in the North-South Skirmish Association, and while historical bullets are nice and all, for me, it's got to be a medal winner. It's got to be something that looks competition worthy, or it's not any good for me. So that's my first priority in looking at these things. Of course, I have a great interest in the historical aspect of these things as well. And this bullet is a copy of the Confederate Richmond Arsenal Sharps bullet. And it's a very close copy. We based it on an original, took direct measurements from an original to make the mold for this thing. And it's got a lot of nice things going for it. For one thing, it's a double cavity mold. I really like that. It helps you crank out the bullets when you're casting up large quantities of these things for competition. Another thing that I like is it's got a really long heel. And that heel is nice because unlike the traditional Christmas tree or ringtail type bullets, it's got a much longer surface for the paper cartridge to be glued to the bullet. With the old ringtail or the Pedersoli ringtail or Christmas tree style bullet, it's got a very small area to attach the paper cartridge to. And I've had problems in competition where you reach into your cartridge box and pull out a cartridge and find that the bullet has separated from the cartridge. And that's no good, of course. So I expect this bullet to behave a lot better and respond better to handling with that long surface area. Another thing that I like about this bullet is that when you push it through the rifling, if you slug the barrel with one of these things, it basically becomes a slug. And so you get full rifling engagement along almost the entire length of the bullet, except for the ogive of the bullet. And that's nice because you have a big bearing surface to really take up the rifling. But another nice thing is the heel gets fully engraved with rifling as well, and that has the tendency to strip or rip the paper off the bullet. And that's good because you don't want any paper fragments adhering to the bullet after it leaves the muzzle, because that can affect accuracy. So in my Pedersoli, the way the bore dimensions are, it will fully engrave that bullet the whole length of the bearing surface. So that's really nice too. Okay, so I'm back from the range, and you can see the results here. I had originally made up cartridges from 30 through 70 grains of weight. I quit at 65 because I noticed at 60 grains of powder that the blast was sufficient, that it was leaking out the cone and actually blasting the hammer back to half cock. And of course did that with 65 grains as well. And I could see that the group sizes weren't getting any better, so I quit since there wasn't any benefit in just burning powder for the heck of it, and possibly we had some overpressure going on there anyway. So this is the results, and now let's look at them in detail. Okay, so the first target here is our 30 grain target. So this was 30 grains of 3F GoX, shot at 50 yards using a bench rest with the Pedersoli Sharps 1859 carbine. You can see the group isn't that bad. Our average group size is about an inch, and the maximum is about 3¼ inches. And that's not bad. Our typical target, a clay pigeon, is a 4-inch circle, which is the diameter of the 9 ring here, of the black portion of the target. And so that's not bad. And in fact, it kind of hints that there may be a sweet spot around 30 grains. But I'm skeptical of that low of a load, especially at 100 yards. But anyway, 30 grains, not too bad. At 35 grains, things opened up. So we can see here that our mean group size is 1.886 inches, and the maximum is 4.6 inches. So this definitely is not going to be useful. Next up, we have the 40 grain target, and this is starting to look pretty decent. This is getting promising, and it's in the range of charge that I would expect for a usual musket to have. So 40 grains, starting to get a pretty decent group. The average is less than 1 inch in diameter, and our max is about 2¼ inches. So this is not bad. Next up, we're at 45 grains of 3F GoX, and this is looking very good. Now, it's just coincidence that this is actually hitting in the 10 ring, probably because I've already done load workups with this musket before with the Pedersoli Christmas tree bullet. So my sights are already, set up for a 6 o'clock hold on the target. And 6 o'clock hold, by the way, is the way I typically set up my competition guns. Some people, like to have it shoot directly to point of aim. I don't like to cover the target with the sight post. So I set up a lollipop hold, a 6 o'clock hold, where I aim, my front sight is right at the bottom of the target, and then I expect that to give me bullseyes. So that's the way I set them up. And you can see that we just got lucky here. With load workups, you don't really care where the bullets are hitting. You care about group size. But in this case, both look really, really good. So we've got about a .781 average group size, and the maximum is just over 2 inches. And if you discount the flyer, those 4 that are there, that's smaller than the size of a 10 ring. So this is looking very, very good. Definitely what I would consider competition worthy. Okay, at 50 grains here, we can see that things are starting to fall apart. So our group size is starting to get bigger again. So our average isn't bad, about 1 inch in diameter average group size, but our max is up to 2.8. So definitely our group size is growing. At 55 grains, again, we can see our group size is getting bigger still, so we're not going in the right direction, and probably we've departed, well, we've definitely departed from the sweet spot. At this point, we're just kind of proving out that, that things are only going to get worse from here on out. And here we are, 60 grains. Again, the group size is getting bigger, so definitely not the right direction. Also, I noticed at 60 grains, the charge was sufficient that it was actually cocking the hammer back to half cock. There was enough gases vented through the percussion cone that it was enough to force the hammer back. So that could mean we've got an overpressure situation going on here. In any case, it's certainly not conducive to accuracy. And finally, here we are at 65 grains of powder. And again, we can see our group size has really opened up. And again, just like with 60 grains, this was blasting the hammer back to half cock. So I quit here at this point. There wasn't any point in going further. The group size is obviously just getting bigger, and it's probably harder on the firearm than what we need. And in competition, you don't need to be shooting 65 grains in any case, just because you don't need to shoot that much powder to get an accurate load. And I've got other bullets that already shoot with 40 grains, so no need to go any further past here. So, in this case, just looking at the targets, it was pretty obvious that 45 grains was really where it was at from this load workup. And just to confirm that, or to put it in a more graphical form, I punched these numbers into a spreadsheet and had it generate a graph. And it really drives the point home here. Now you can see at 30 grains that something was going on, and it's possible that we might play around with the 30 grain load, or even less than that. Go back and try 20 to 30 grains and see if there's a sweet spot there. Sometimes you'll find these guns might have more than one sweet spot where it develops good accuracy, and typically the least powder you can get away with is what you want to do. If you can shoot 30 grains instead of 45 grains and get just as good of a group, well, why not shoot the less powder? Of course, less powder opens you up to some potential problems. Probably your velocities are going to be lower, which means your flight times are going to be longer, which means your bullet's going to be more susceptible to drift in wind. And of course, your drop might be longer at say 100 yards versus 50 yards. So there's some problems when you start going too low with your loads. But nonetheless, the data here indicates that there might be something worth exploring around 30 grains of powder. Anyway, as soon as we get up to 35 grains, we can definitely see that our group size is high. And as we get to 45 grains, we really get to our lowest group size, and then beyond that, it just starts to open up again. So for this gun, and this is typical, you'll see this for any kind of black powder firearm for sure. There is a sweet spot, at least one, where you're going to get maximum accuracy or maximum I guess the minimum group size is what you're going to find. Now, this is why you should never fiddle with your sights until you have done a load workup. There's no point in trying to set your sights, to chase the bullseye until you've got a load that's producing the best group that you can get. And you may also find that there are some bullets in some muskets, depending on their twist rate and the condition of the bore and that sort of thing. There are some bullets that are just never going to work. And I've had that happen before. I've had guns that I've worked for 6 months to try to come up with a decent load for, and it just didn't work. With any bullet that I tried. So that happens. But this is typical for what you'll see. You will find that there will be a sweet spot, and that's going to produce your smallest group size. And once you've confirmed that, then that is where you're going to set up your sights so that the bullets go where you want them to go, at that range. So by way of comparison here, this target is from a load workup that I did with the Pedersoli Christmas tree bullet. And this is the bullet, or one of the bullets that Pedersoli makes for their rifle. And I found it to perform pretty well with 40 grains of 3F powder. As you can see here, it's a very decent group. And this has been my competition load for this gun for some time. So it's good, just as good a group as what we were getting there with the new Eras Gone Richmond bullet. But I will probably be switching to the Eras Gone Richmond bullet, mostly because it's a double cavity mold. So I can get twice as many bullets made in a casting session as I do with the Pedersoli mold. So I really like that. I also, as I said before, I really like the long heel on this bullet. I think this is going to make for a more durable cartridge. It's also neat that I'm shooting a historically correct bullet. This is a highly accurate copy of an actual historical Confederate bullet. So that's kind of neat too. So I hope this has been useful to you. Hopefully this will give you some insight on what it takes to do a load workup for your gun. The same things that I did here would apply to any muzzleloader. And if you need to figure out if you get a new gun, definitely ask around. What bullet and charge do people use? But almost never can you just take what other people say and then find it magically works in your gun. It might, but it might not. And so the only way to find out for sure is to do a load workup. If you're going to shoot competition, you really owe it to yourself and your teammates to invest the time in doing load workups. If you can't count on having at least a 4-inch group at 50 yards off a bench, then as an old teammate of mine used to say, you ain't got nothing. So hopefully this has been useful, and if you like this video, please subscribe down below and also click the like button, and we'll keep making more videos. Thanks a lot.